Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Bleach anime review. This one's going to be for Bleach Season 2, which is episodes 21 to 41, so it's a 21 episode season. And this season is the first of two seasons covering the Soul Society arc, or the Rescue Rukia arc, as some people call it. But yeah, mainly it's called the Soul Society arc, and obviously it's Season 2 and 3, make it up. After that, I think you go into the Bount arc, which is one of the kind of anime-only filler arcs. Yeah, for me, the Soul Society arc definitely is where the show gets like really interesting, because it's where you begin to introduce a lot more Soul Reaper characters. You introduce a lot more powers of Zanpakuto's, which is definitely what makes the fights in Bleach very interesting. What's actually interesting about this season 2, the first part of the arc, is that they kind of hold back on that. They don't really give you a massive amount of Zanpakuto powers, and hold back with a lot of fights and stuff like that. Like, it ends on a really interesting note and sets up a like really action-packed second part of the arc with season 3. But this season 2 is good because it sets up a lot of plot in place. There's actually a lot of little setup moments for some really big reveals much later on down the line with the true nature of Ichigo's power and stuff like that. Ichigo's relation to like a major clan in Bleach and stuff like that. It's a really good season. The first season was definitely a lot more character focused and stuff like that, because you had to get to know the characters before you get into this massive kind of fight section. Because if there's any like issue that I may have with Bleach kind of going forward, it's that the show is almost so focused on fights that you almost lack a lot of time to really give to character development. Now, this is actually fairly good with it. Like, towards the later end of the Arrancar arc and stuff like that, it gets a bit crazy with it, with too many fights going on at the same time. But here they kind of keep it kind of fairly low, and so like when you're focusing on one fight, you kind of get some character development with each character, maybe some backstory at the end of the fight about one of the characters. That happens a couple of times in this season. So there's overall some nice stuff. That it advances the plot forward, a lot of mystery, a lot of world building kind of stuff, character, and just really sets up the first main plot of Bleach. Yeah, I'm going to change the format up going forward in these reviews, just because I wasn't quite happy with the kind of summary I kind of did, just going through episode by episode. I felt like it makes these episodes kind of too long without me actually giving my opinion on stuff. And I've already tried to record this video before, and I think I stopped like at like 50 minutes, and I still wasn't finished summarizing all of the episodes. So I think I'm just going to go more freeform, because that's the way I do a lot of my videos. I'm still going to refer to my notes because I have a lot of kind of facts that happen in each episode and stuff like that as we go. But definitely going to make it a little bit more freeform going forward, just so it's more like opinion focused rather than just me stating what happens in every episode. I suppose I'll focus on stuff like the main like first big event that probably happens. Like, the first episode is actually worth probably discussing on its own. Episode 21. This is obviously they enter the Soul Society through the Precipice world. Orihime kind of helps them and stuff like that, and they arrive in the Rukon district, just outside the Serite, and immediately you're confronted with the first fight of the season. And what I like here is that you actually don't know the exact power level of all of our characters that we're following on this journey to rescue Rukia. We've obviously followed Ichigo's training with Urahara, but we don't really know the full extent of how powerful he is, how good of a fighter he is now. Same with Orihime and Chad. We very much skipped over a lot of their kind of development, and really only know stuff like that they can use their power whenever they want now. We don't know how powerful they are. Uryu, much the same. We know that he did something to make himself more powerful, but we don't know the full extent at the start of this season. So it's an interesting dynamic. And then of course Yoruichi, there's a lot of mystery surrounding her. We get revealed some of them towards the end of this season, but we still don't know a lot about all of these characters. Like, we know more or less who they are as individuals, but their powers not so much. So the first big fight of the season is Ichigo versus Jidanbo, who's obviously this giant Shinigami Soul Reaper who guards the main entrance into the Serite. And this is actually a really excellent showcase of Ichigo's power in that it's not a really good fight. Like, really, it's just lots of one-hit shots. Like, Jidambo's like, no one has ever survived two of my attacks. Ichigo survives two, and he destroys both of Jidambo's axes with one strike, and instantly kind of beats him and stuff like that. And what I like here is that it shows a thing that you really notice throughout this whole season. That Ichigo and his friends, this whole group, has no interest in killing anyone. That their sole goal here is to rescue Rukia. If someone gets in their way, they're going to fight, but they don't want to kill. So their aim in these fights is always just to kind of defeat their opponent, maybe knock them out and stuff, or something like that, and get by them. And what actually happens here with Ichigo is that he defeats Jidambo, but doesn't want to kill him. And in fact, immediately everyone's kind of trying to like heal him and stuff like that, make sure he's okay after the battle. And Jidambo kind of respects this and actually opens the gate for them in response to this. So I kind of like that, in that another big plot going on in the background of this season is a lot of the kind of lies almost that we've got in season one about the true nature of the Soul Society, in that Rukia mentions that, to all the souls, that, you're going to a better place, the Soul Society, you'll never be sad, hungry again, and stuff like that. But then you actually find out that it's fine for the people in the Serite, all the Soul Reapers, if you're on a squad and stuff like that. But for the other normal people, they're in the Rukon district, where things aren't so good, especially like some of the lower districts. And you later find out in this season that people actually die. You can actually die in the Soul Society. That's the whole kind of cycle, and that you can die in the Soul Society, you can also die in the physical world. And, that's how the cycle goes. And it really kind of shows you the issues in the Soul Society, that there's definitely some corrupt Soul Reapers out there, but for the most part, it's just like that they're so stagnant that they're just in this kind of routine of like, okay, we have all the power, we're doing the best we can with our own jobs, but for the most part, people are suffering. And you really see that with the squads, as they all squabble with each other to try and prove to each other that they're the best by taking out the intruders first. And you just see a lot of arguments between all the Soul Society members. And it says a lot that this group of like teenagers and a cat, they come in and just cause chaos throughout this complete, basically military organization that deals with the whole cycle of the world, keeping balance in the world, and they're just thrown to chaos by like 5 people. And it really kind of shows, like in later seasons when you actually have the squads working together, the impact that Ichigo and Co have, in that because of what they did here, just a few people, they really inspired a lot of the Soul Reapers to actually I suppose come together as a group, improve their skills, because there are people out there that are stronger will, have better beliefs than them and stuff like that. So that's something that's pointed out in like basically the last season of the anime with Ichigo, and that it's only in that last season that all of the captains realize how big of an impact Ichigo actually had on the Soul Society, changing them for the better just through kind of sheer will and determination. So yeah, first fight's pretty interesting, but the big moment here is actually he opens up the gate and Squad 3 Captain Gin Ichimaru is kind of waiting there, and he's basically our villain for this arc. Obviously we get reveals later on about like Aizen and stuff like that in season 3, but for now Gin Ichimaru is basically the guy they've set up as the villain. And I think he works perfectly well for the role that they've given him. And his character over the course of the whole series is really cool. You don't get a massive amount on him, but I think that works to his favor, in that all you have is that, look, he's a captain, Squad 3 captain. He never opens his eyes. He never removes the smile from his face. He doesn't show any emotion or any sort of intonation in his voice. It's just completely, it's not monotone. He just speaks the exact same way basically every time he speaks. Um, and a lot of the characters who talk about him always say that they have no idea what his goals are, what he's thinking about when he talks to them, and especially when they fight him, they have no idea what he's fighting for. And that's just a really interesting dynamic because you can clearly see just by the way he's acting that he's up to something. You obviously later find out that it's just to kind of draw attention to him rather than Aizen, because Aizen's the true villain. But he just does such a good job at making you suspicious of him, but he's also like really cool at the same time, because immediately like Ichigo's just beating Jidambo, this giant guy, and then suddenly it's a captain, and Ichigo's like, if I can beat this big guy, I can beat this guy who doesn't even have his eyes open. And then just suddenly out of nowhere, Ichimaru activates his Shikai. His Zanpakuto is called Shinzo, and basically all his Shikai does is really, it makes his sword extend, like the blade just goes, like comes out like a rocket basically. It's not a projectile weapon, it just instantly extends, and it's yes, it's long, but it's the speed at which he does it. It's almost like he's fired a gun sword at someone, and Ichigo just barely blocks it. And then it's something that's set up throughout this whole season that captains are trouble if when it comes to our group of characters fighting them. Really, Ichigo of the group here is the only one who can stand up to them. And then later on, you get kind of revealed that Uryu is kind of potentially at that level, but kind of just barely. So it's pretty cool with that, the way they set that up. And you also get that the people of the Rukon district, they help Jidambo after Gin wounds Jidambo for opening up the gate, and Orihime heals him. You have that the people of the Rukon district actually almost help Ichigo and co because they're against the people within the Serite. That's how bad the problems are between the two. So that's kind of pretty interesting the way that goes. And another one of the plots that we get introduced to is we get introduced to the Shiba clan, primarily Kukaku and then Gonju Shiba. And this is a really interesting plot. I suppose characters introduced, because ultimately you later find out that Ishin, Ichigo's father, is a member of the Shiba clan. I think most people assume he's basically Gonju and Kukaku's uncle or something like that, which makes Gonju and Ichigo kind of something like cousins or something like that. I'm terrible at family kind of tree type thing, but it means that Ichigo is in essence like a Shiba too, and you get a lot of characters throughout this whole season. When they see Ichigo, he reminds them of someone they knew. I think you get it with Ukitake, you get it with Rukia, I suppose, as well, Byakuya, I think Gonju to some extent, and Kukaku to some extent as well. And these characters end up being pretty interesting. Like I think a problem with the season is that the first episode's amazing, but because of the result of that episode, they're forced to find another way to get into the Serite, which results in them having to just train for another few days to master this Reikaku cannonball technique, flower crane cannon, and it just slows the season down after like a super action-packed start. It immediately picks up again once they get back into the Serite, but it's just a kind of weird pacing problem I have with the overall kind of season. It works because you get introduced to like Gonju and Kukaku as characters, and especially the whole idea that their brother, who you later find out is Kaien Shiba, who's the former Squad 13 lieutenant and like one of Rukia's kind of closest friends, and she had to kill him because he was attacked by Hollow. They find out in season 3, but for now they set it up that there's this mystery around. Kaien was killed by other Soul Reapers. They don't know the full situation, and then it's later revealed that Rukia is responsible, but you don't know the full situation once again. And overall with Gonju, you get that he and Ichigo hate each other at the start because of the whole Soul Reaper thing, but they come together once I suppose Gonju realizes that Ichigo is not like any of the other Soul Reapers, and that he's there because he owes Rukia and he respects the kind of honor there. And I suppose in some essence senses the kind of Shiba kind of clan spirit or something like that within him. Um, all this happens like kind of while in the background. You kind of cut to the Soul Society, and Aizen, Captain Aizen of Squad 5, is the only other kind of person to really suspect Gin Ichimaru. And, you know, it just that's really all it is. Like, he goes to Renji and kind of starts asking Renji about, don't you think it's weird how Rukia's execution has been, like, moved up, given that her crimes, while bad, aren't, like, the worst we've ever seen, and she's not even a ranked squad member. Why is so much being done to execute her so quickly? And it presents this whole situation that, like, something's happening in the background to put Rukia's execution forward quicker and quicker. And I suppose this results in Renji acting in the way he does as the kind of season goes on. Yeah, and with the captains, like, you don't get like introduced to a lot of them by name this season. Like, mainly this season we get introduced to Gin Ichimaru of Squad 3, Aizen of Squad 5, Toshiro Hitsugaya Squad 10, but his arc really comes more into play in the next season. Here his role is mainly like Momo reacts to the death of Aizen in the in later episodes, and he basically told her that he was suspicious of Gin, which results in her like attacking Gin because she thinks he killed Aizen. And while she took the more like emotional aggressive approach, Hitsugai is still suspicious of Gin because of this and probably assumes that's what exactly happened. But because he's more mature than her, he kind of takes the approach to kind of investigate. And you follow him as basically our good captain towards the end of this season, going into season 3. And he ends up being pretty interesting, even though he's like the youngest captain. You do meet Yamamoto, but he's mainly just there. Okay, he's the head of the whole thing. He's the captain commander, but you don't really know him personally. You get introduced to Shunsui Kyoraku, Squad 8 captain, towards the end of the season again with Chad, the only episodes that focus on Chad. And he's one of my favourite captains just because, unlike a lot of them, he has really no interest in fighting. He's more about, relaxing, having a drink, just having fun. Like, he's a really fun-loving person and would rather kind of talk things out than anything else. In that, he's one of the only captains who like approaches one of the intruders, who's obviously our group of heroes, and actually tries to like understand what they're doing. So when he talks to Chad, he kind of tries to understand what exactly Chad's doing, and really doesn't attempt to fight back against Chad until he realizes that, okay, this guy is so set on doing this that it would be dishonorable of me not to fight him because he's so eager to do what he's doing. Like, he does his duty when he needs to, so he's not just going to let him pass just because he doesn't want to fight. And it's a really interesting dynamic because ultimately he ends up defeating Chad, but he doesn't kill him. He purposefully doesn't kill him and has him kind of sent to prison rather than have him like finished off. And he's one of the, we don't get to see what his Zanpakuto is until like season 14 or something like that. We don't see what his Shikai is. We don't even know what his Bankai is. Yeah. And then the other main captain you get introduced to is Kenpachi Zaraki, who's the Squad 11 captain. And a lot of the Soul Reapers that are encountered of our hero group is Squad 11. You actually find out towards the end that Squad 11's basically been almost completely like wiped out in terms of the number of people that our hero group has encountered. Like Ichigo and Ganju obviously take out Ikaku and Yumichika. Yachiru, I suppose, is concerned with Zaraki when that fight happens later on. And then Chad, Orihime, Uryu, and so on. They end up taking out most of the rest of the squad as they go along. So Squad 11's just kind of like they're completely defeated as you go through. But he's an interesting character because he's the only captain who doesn't know the name of his Zanpakuto and doesn't care to know the name of his Zanpakuto either. And so you have that interesting dynamic as just he is a guy who just loves fighting and fights to prove his own skill, and he sees the other Soul Reapers using their Zanpakuto as basically having to rely on someone else's skill to augment your own and stuff like that. It's a super interesting dynamic. But other than that, like you don't really get introduced to many of the other captains. Like you meet Squad 9 Captain Tozen and Squad 7 Captain Komamura, but it's only like one scene as they both kind of say, yeah, we're going to join the battle now. Um, you meet Mayuri Kuretsuchi, Squad 12 Captain, for one or two times, and you just get that he has this rivalry with Zaraki over, like Zaraki obviously isn't intelligent and only cares about fighting, while Kuretsuchi only really cares about like information intelligence and wants to take the Ryoka, as they call the intruders, to experiment on them, and really has no interest in fighting. So a lot of interesting characters introduced. Coming back to some of the fights that we get in the season, um, probably the first proper fight that we get is Ichigo versus Ikaku. Ikaku's the third seat of Squad 11, because Yachiru is the lieutenant. And he's interesting. Like I think he's a little bit mischaracterized at the start of his first appearance when he does the Lucky dance. I know luck is kind of a thing they do with him a lot, kind of when they mention him, but he never does this dance and never acts so odd like he does in this very first appearance. He's fine like after the first like minute or two. Like he's characterized perfectly fine, but he looks like such a weirdo when you first get introduced to him. And that says a lot considering you also meet Yumichika, who fights Ganju here, and Yumichika's the Squad 11 fifth seat, and he only is a fifth seat because he doesn't like the number 4 and he prefers the number 5. It's more beautiful, and even him, while Ikaku's more of like a Zaraki light, he's basically like the similar characters. Yumichika's more of like he cares about his looks and doesn't really want to get himself ruined in a fight. But ultimately, when a big fight comes around, he's completely up for it. That's the whole thing of Squad 11. And this is interesting because with Ichigo in a lot of these fights, what you get is that the one thing he's missing is experience fighting. He ultimately is skilled enough and has such a high potential and can learn so quickly that he can beat almost anyone if given enough time. The only thing he's lacking is just, number of hours involved in fights. And then you get flashbacks multiple times throughout the season to the full extent of his training with Urahara, that even after we saw when he kind of comes out of the hollow thing and has his proper Zanpakuto and fights Urahara, he fought him for like 5 days after that, like non-stop basically, to get more experience and kind of fully train. And that's why has such high stamina and stuff like that, and he's so strong now. And the big thing Ichigo has problems with most of the Soul Reapers here is just that he struggles to just adapt to everyone's different Zanpakuto. Like Ikaku's Zanpakuto is a Hozukimaru, and the way it kind of works is that like it's this kind of staff with the kind of blade at the top, and then it's segmented as well, which he uses to trick Ichigo, and eventually he figures this out and defeats Ikaku. But ultimately, like, he has to learn something from each of his fights, and it kind of works pretty well throughout the course of the season. Yumichika's Zanpakuto is Fuji Kujaku, and that's like the sword basically changes from just a sword to 4 kind of like curved blades, all kind of separated out like a kind of flower petal. It's pretty interesting. And obviously, you later find out that's not the true name of his sword. He doesn't want the people in his squad to know that his sword isn't a fully combat-based one, and it's more of a kind of Kido-based like one, where it's actually about like draining people's power rather than just a better sword and stuff like that. What else is there to talk about? While the Ikaku Ichigo fight is mainly a one-on-one sword battle, Ganji is more about using his kind of Seppa, sand kind of powers and stuff like that, trickery to win, and ultimately the two win, and then you kind of, it was around this point in the season you get introduced to Hinataro, who's our main kind of ally, kind of Soul Reaper character. He's the 7th seat of Squad 4, which is the healing squad, and he joins up with Ichigo and Ganju because he also cares about Rukia, because she's one of the only people around him basically who gave him any sort of respect and actually talked to him. And you see that a lot of the squad don't like Squad 4 because they're not combat based. And again, it just adds into the fact that there's a lot of it's just like silly stuff going on in the Soul Society with regards to squads disliking each other for very little reason, and stuff like that. So yeah, um, Uryu and Orihime's involvement in the whole season is basically they encounter Jidambo's brother, Jirobo, who's the fourth seed of Squad 7. And yeah, he it's just it's basically a battle of two projectile users. Um, Jirobo's Zanpakuto is Sunzaki Garazu, and it just turns into these basically flying shuriken things. But Uryu basically reveals how powerful he is with his new Quincy bow and instantly defeats the guy. There's a few kind of moments where Orihime tries to get involved in the fight, but she doesn't have the kind of killer instinct to actually try to hurt someone, and so one of her fairies kind of Tsubaki gets injured, and Uryu kind of takes over and takes the guy out basically. Um, so that's really their only involvement, and that's a slight negative with the season in that Chad and Uryu and Orihime aren't really involved in the season all that much, really. As I said, Kyoraku is the main focus with Chad, and Chad is with Chad. You actually get some nice flashback in the reveal about why he fights. You get revealed that he used to fight all the time, but then there was a moment where he got into too big of a fight, and his grandfather had to save him, and this impacted him so much. And what the words that his grandfather told him that, use your fists for something other than yourself. And only when he met Ichigo did he realize what that was meant to be. That Ichigo fights for him, and Chad will fight for Ichigo. If they're both willing to lay their lives down for something they believe in, they'll both fight for each other. And so Ichigo wants to save Rukia, so that's why Chad is fighting for Rukia, because he wants to help Ichigo. And obviously he's defeated by Kyoraku, and that's mainly his involvement in the season. So it's nice to get that nice backstory character development with Chad, but he's not involved all that much. He does take out much, I think, of Squad 8 and Squad 11, most of the kind of unranked members and stuff like that, so that's pretty nice. What else? Next big fight is probably Ichigo Renji. Renji kind of leaves at a lieutenant's meeting in the middle of nowhere and leaves his lieutenant badge behind because he's going to fight Ichigo without anyone's permission, because Gin got in trouble for obviously encountering them the first time. And what we get here is just, I suppose, why Renji is fighting, and his real connection to Rukia. Like he's come across as like, okay, he knows Rukia and is former friends with her and is acting a little bit friendly to her, but why is he so angry at Ichigo? And what the reveal is ultimately that like he blames Ichigo for Rukia about to be killed. Basically, that in his mind, Ichigo stole her powers when in fact Rukia gave her powers willingly to Ichigo to help save him. Ichigo doesn't like refute what Renji says, and in fact agrees with it and wants to make up for it, and so that's why he's so eager and willing and winning the fight. The fight does have a weird dynamic to it. This whole idea of they only have a certain number of attacks they can use. It's like barely ever brought up again in the whole series, apart from this fight. And ultimately in this fight it doesn't even work because Ichigo's wounded by Renji because of this mistake. He eventually has a flashback to his training with Urahara, and I think this is a really strong and probably defines Ichigo a lot, in that the reason he wasn't such a good warrior initially, in that he was afraid of dying in battle, he was also afraid of killing anyone, and he was also afraid of his inability to protect people when that's so important to him. And so he has to have this like iron resolve to know in a battle that he won't die, that if he strikes someone, his strikes are going to hurt them, kill them if necessary, and if he decides that he's going to protect someone, he's going to do it just that iron resolve, and it just works. Urahara's line when he basically says these three things is just really strong. Um, and so ultimately, Ichigo wins the fight, breaks Renji's Zanpakuto, and wounds him. And at this point, you get the Renji backstory, which is actually pretty well done. You just get that Renji and Rukia grew up together on the streets of one of the lowest Rukon districts, 78. And ultimately, the reason they became Soul Reaper is because they wanted to improve their lives and get out of this, 78th Rukon district, because their other three friends that you see in this flashback actually died, and it's a really powerful moment because they just cut to it out of nowhere. Like, they just skipped forward a few years, and their friends are there, and then suddenly Renji and Ruki are talking. We need to become Soul Reapers. We need to improve our lives, or else this will happen. And the camera just pans out, and you see three graves, three friends missing, and you're like, oh, wow, you can die here. So you completely understand why they become Soul Reapers, and then ultimately you get the true reason Renji's fighting here is that it's not that he really blames Ichigo, it's more that he blames himself, because Rukia obviously was offered the chance to join the Kuchiki clan, Byakuya's clan, and Renji actually urged her to accept this in the first place, and she only accepted basically because he said this to her, like, this is her perfect chance to basically completely improve her life, and he was happy for her to be happy. But ultimately, that's what he blames for her being in this position now. Byakuya isn't doing anything to help Rukia in this situation, and in fact wants her executed like as soon as possible. And the reveal is that he wants nothing more than to beat Byakuya, because he blames Byakuya for it, because he blames Byakuya for taking Rukia away from him, and so he wants Ichigo from this point on to fight and get Rukia back. It just works pretty well because you at this point you're really beginning to see Renji and Ichigo come together, and you see how similar the two actually are. So that really works for me. You also get one filler episode in this season, which just it's a filler episode. You cut back to Karakura Town. It's mainly focused on Ichigo's sister Yuzu. She finds this cat who's actually a spiritual being. It's got Don Kanonji in it. You get Karin, Ururu, and Jinta involved, and it's basically this whole Karakura squad with the Karakura Red and stuff like that. And yeah, it's a complete filler episode. I like the fact that it returns to Karakura Town and just lets you know that while all these characters are away, there are actually still hollows appearing there, and there are a group dealing with that. That's nice to know, but it really is a really bad time to cut away from the main story, because you just had this really strong moment, like Renji's backstory. Ichigo's gonna save Rukia for Renji as well now, and filler. And then immediately you cut back after the filler episode to like Ichigo collapsing, almost dead. Hinataro is trying to heal him, and one of the bigger reveals in this whole season is this mystery around how much power does Ichigo have? What is the true nature of his power? Because there is a moment in the Renji Ichigo fight where Ichigo takes this really bad blow from Renji's Zanpakuto, and you think it should have killed him. Like, Ichigo was so wide open during the attack. And Hinataro reveals, like, after he healed Ichigo, that Ichigo actually had this mask on him that actually absorbed some of the blow, that basically saved it from being fatal. And it's a hollow mask. It's basically the same mask that Ichigo had in Season 1 when he got out of the kind of crater, when he kind of got his Soul Reaper powers back. But he ripped that mask off and it kind of crumbled away. And now he has it here, and it's almost full, apart from the bit that was broken off from the attack. And you get it later on as well after the fight with Kenpachi Zaraki, when he again takes a really tough blow that probably would have cut him in half, but it's blocked by the hollow mask again. And again, it was fully back again. Yoruichi takes it away, and you're left wondering, like, what's going on? Because Yoruichi says, like, oh, I'll just take this away. I don't think this is what it is, but just to be sure, so very interesting. And then later on you get to the inner world part during the Zaraki fight, and it reveals a little bit more. And ultimately you don't get the full reveal on this until I think it's like around chapter 550 or something like that in the manga. It isn't covered in the anime, at least unless the anime comes back. Um, but yeah, we'll get to that eventually. Um, the one of the bigger moments is obviously the Aizen's death that happens. He knows something's going on. Momo comes over to him, his lieutenant, and basically they have a kind of heart to heart. And that night, Aizen leaves while she's asleep. And next morning, she arrives at the meeting and finds Aizen dead, impaled against the wall. It's confirmed he's dead. Captain Unohana even says so. Um, and you just like, whoa, what just happened here? Our one captain who seemed to have any idea about what was going on with Gin is suddenly killed, and then Toshiro takes up the kind of role as the kind of guy investigating Gin, and you get this whole dynamic that Momo and Toshiro are actually really old friends because they kind of grew up together, and she's very emotionally invested in this because her captain and almost father figure Aizen has just been killed, while Toshiro takes a more kind of a reasoned approach to it and stuff like that. It's a really nice dynamic that happens, and especially when Ichimaru arrives at the scene of Aizen's death, and he's just like, "Oh, Aizen's dead," in his kind of classic, like no emotion voice, and Toshiro and Momo both know what happened, and you get Momo like loses her temper, attacks, and Hitsugaya is forced to step in when like Izuru steps in to like defend his captain and stuff like that. A lot of stuff happening. You really see the Soul Society almost beginning to fall apart. The various squads, like this is squad 5 feuding with squad 3, squad 10 stepping in between them. Zaraki's gone off on his own. Renji's the squad 6 lieutenant. He's gone off on his own. One of the squad 4 seated members is off with Ichigo. Like, you really see a lot of people just switching sides, turning on each other and stuff like that. It's really kind of strong. But what happens after this is obviously the fight with mainly it's the fight with Zaraki, and he's a really interesting character just because his whole character is that he loves fighting so much so that he offers Ichigo the chance to just slash him once at the start of the fight, and Ichigo can't actually cut him. And ultimately, Ichigo tries to big himself up. He's not afraid of Zaraki. He fights back a bit. I think he wounds Zaraki, and then suddenly he just snaps Zangetsu. Like Zaraki just increases his power a bit and snaps Zangetsu in half. And ultimately, you get this moment where just Ichigo kind of underestimates Zaraki because he doesn't know what the name of his sword is. I will say you do find out what the name of his sword is in the manga at some point. I can't remember the exact chapter, but he does, and he does get more powerful. You see what a Shikai is. Probably won't have a Bankai just because of the timing of the last arc and stuff like that, but still interesting enough. Yeah, we're getting into the last few episodes here, so not much longer to go. And yeah, you at this point of the fight, you cut to the inner world of Ichigo, because his sword is broken, and in the inner world, he's forced to fight this kind of hollow kind of version of himself. It doesn't really look like a hollow, but it's kind of got the same white colours. It's kind of like a dark version of Ichigo, but you later find out it's basically its hollow powers. And basically, what happens is Ichigo's given just a random sword, and this hollow Ichigo fights with Zangetsu. And he uses it in such a unique and interesting way, really using all the powers of the sword, that Ichigo realizes that he's no better than Zaraki, not knowing the name of his sword, in that he's never really tried to learn the true secrets of the sword, never really thought of it as anything more than a sword and a weapon, and now kind of realizes the full potential of it. And ultimately, the fight doesn't really mean that much. It's just all about Ichigo coming to realize that I've been a fool, I need to find the kind of true nature of the sword. And so the swords eventually swap when Zangetsu decides that Ichigo is ready. And the fight resumes. Ichigo kind of overpowers Zaraki, takes him out. They both go kind of increase their spiritual pressure to the max and attack each other. And Zaraki collapses. He says he's lost, but Ichigo's also been wounded badly, only saved by the hollow mask blocking some of it. as you find out later on. And yeah, Ichigo's defeated one captain barely, and it's just a really interesting dynamic because, again, Ichigo's nearly killed here. Yoruichi obviously steps in to save him, but it's still interesting. And really, that's all of Ichigo's fights in the first season, in this season two. Um, Nothing like super impressive. The fight with Zaraki is cool because it is Ichigo's first fight with a captain, but because Zaraki doesn't really have any special Zanpakuto powers outside of just being a good swordsman and being super kind of crazy, it kind of doesn't have the impact of some of the other ones, but still pretty cool nonetheless. And at this point, also, Ganju and Hinataro have left Ichigo to go and save Rukia on their own. They arrive, and you think everything's going to be fine here, but when they come in, Ganju recognizes Rukia as the person who killed his brother Kaien. And this is the moment where you just kind of go like, oh, this is a lot of connections here coming together. That Rukia is so down on herself because of this. She can't like defend herself. As far as she's aware, she had no right killing him, and that's exactly what happens. And ultimately, you don't get a lot of information on this just yet, because so much action is happening. Byakuya arrives, obviously. Hinataro shows a really big moment of bravery where he steps out to confront Byakuya, but Ganju, kind of realizes that, oh, I'm here, I'll help Ichigo, steps in to fight Byakuya, but he uses his Zanpakuto, which is called Senbon Zakura, and he's actually got one of the cooler Zanpakutos in the entire series, because basically what happens is he activates it, the blade of the sword disappears, disperses into these pink petals, but what they are actually in fact is just these tiny little blades, kind of. I think it's they describe it like the light makes them look like flower petals, but they are in fact blades, and he can control them with his mind, hands, whatever, and all of these like hundreds of petals instantly hit Ganju and just completely like cut him apart. He's not killed, but it's one of the most devastating moves like you really see. And if this is just a Shikai, what does this guy's Bankai do? And this is why Ruki was so scared about Ichigo fighting Byakuya in the first place, because how does Ichigo, who can barely handle like a fancy sword that bends a bit, how's he going to handle a guy who can like telepathically control like a million blades at once? It's a really interesting dynamic. At this point, you get to see it. Yoshiro Ukitake, Squad 13 captain for the first time. This is Rukia's captain. He steps in. He's kind of doesn't know what's going on because he's been sick for a while. You later find out that he for many years he's had like a sickness and kind of is very rarely active, but he stops Byakuya from killing Ganju basically, and yeah. What then you basically go into the last episode effectively. You also get Zaraki's backstory. That's actually something I forgot to mention. You just get that before he was even a Soul Reaper officially, he had his Zanpakuto. I think in a later episode reveals he took it from some random Soul Reaper he killed, and he's just obsessed with fighting. And then Yachiru is just a little girl. Something happened to her town. Was it Zaraki who killed everyone? I'm not sure. They bond over the fact that they both don't have names, and he names her Yachiru after the one person who. What did he say? It's the one person he's ever like truly enjoyed fighting and wants to fight again or something like that. That's why he names Yachiru, and gives her name, and then he comes up with his own name after the place where he's from, which is Zaraki, and then takes the title Kenpachi. So that's that. Yeah, and then you get the reveal about who Yoruichi is when she heals Ichigo, and that she's not actually a male cat, she's actually a female woman, an extremely attractive female woman, and obviously there's that really funny scene where she just completely embarrasses Ichigo by like appearing to him naked, and then she actually like you get a lot of reveals about her, and that like towards the end of the season, and that okay. Urahara is a former captain. Urahara's best friend is Yoruichi, who's now revealed to be a woman. who are these people? You're just like asking those sort of questions. And then Ichigo instantly runs off after being healed to go find Rukia, lands in the middle of the bridge, super epic action showdown. He proves that he's strong enough to at least fight somewhat evenly with Byakuya, like the move that nearly killed him at the end of season 1, he can now see clearly and dodge and block. But as he's about to activate Senbon Zakura again, Yoruichi appears blocking this attack, and the captains all know who she is, like, and they're just like, "You're back, you again," and stuff like that. It's a really cool scene. And then Rukia and Ichigo have their reunion, and the reunion is actually pretty nice because they just kind of stop in the middle of this big fight scene to just have this emotional reunion where you get the reminder of the "I'll never forgive you" line from last season, and Ichigo's just like, "Look, stop talking, I'm here to rescue, I'm going to do it." And then out of nowhere, the two just start arguing like old times and stuff like that. Ukitake and Byakuya mentioned that Ichigo looks similar to someone who looks like, obviously, Cayenne, but Byakuya just kind of brushes it off. No, he's not the person you're thinking of, and stuff like that. Yeah, that's how it ends. It ends with this huge confrontation on the bridge. Ichigo wants to fight Byakuya. Yoruichi's gonna stop Ichigo from doing this. The captains both know who Yoruichi is and are shocked to see her. Rukia is right there, not in her cell. She has the potential to be rescued, but there are two captains right there. Ganji's badly injured. It's a really kind of crazy cliffhanger to end the season on. And in many ways, is not really like a season cliffhanger, because it really is just kind of like a cliffhanger in the middle of an arc, because season 2 and 3 make up the Soul Society arc. But it works quite well actually as a way to end the season, because it is a really strong moment before probably the battle that you've most been looking forward to is potentially about to happen: Ichigo versus Byakuya. And obviously what happens from here is obviously like you get the reveal about Bankai, and that Ichigo has to learn Bankai before he can even try to take on one of the other captains, in that he was actually lucky in fighting Zaraki, in that he is so obsessed with just his own strength that he's not open to the fact that he can have like a Shikai Bankai. And so he was the only captain that perhaps Ichigo could have beaten at this moment in time. But yeah, overall, this is a really good season, I think. I've already given most of my main thoughts on the season, but there are some nice stuff here, some setups for stuff that happens way down the line, some mystery going on in the Soul Society with regards to what's moving Rukia's execution so far forward. What's Gin actually done? And that's one of the things in this season. You don't see Gin actually do anything as a villain. He just stands there and acts like he's done something, but you never actually see him do anything. And you wonder, like, okay, what happened to Aizen then? Maybe Gin did it, maybe he didn't. And you just see, again, a lot of the squads falling apart, a lot of the fights getting bigger and bigger. Only negative would be a lack of focus on everyone apart from Ichigo on the main group, but some pretty cool reveals, the first step in seeing some of the best fights in the series coming, make this one of the better seasons of Bleach. So yeah, I'll be back in a week or two with my review of season 3. Obviously it takes me a while to like watch the whole season again, take notes to the point where I'm confident in like remembering everything about the season and giving my full thoughts. So realistically, the schedule is probably going to be once every 2, maybe 3 weeks. I'm going to try and keep it to 2, but getting closer to Christmas, it may be 3. So, yeah, look out for the next. I'll probably get the next one out, just before Christmas or something like that. But yeah, that's my review of Bleach season 2. Here's the DVD box set, as I started off with. Pretty nice. On the discs, we have Ichigo on the first disc, Ichimaru and Renji on the second and third disc then, and then Zaraki and Rukia on the fourth and fifth discs. Not really sure why Rukia is the cover of this, in that like the only time you ever see her in her Soul Reaper Shiakusho is like 2 seconds of flashback in like one of the later episodes. The rest of the time she's in her kind of white kind of prison gear. But yeah, that's been the review. Thanks for watching, and bye.